United States of America does not torture. We can make that commitment here tonight.
4 years ago today that President Obama made this promise to the nation.
We will close the Guantanamo Bay detention camp and determine how to deal with those who have been held there.
Well, since that time, President Obama has not only not closed Guantanamo Bay, he has twice signed legislation that he first promised to veto that makes it more difficult for him to close Gitmo. The National Defense Authorization Act is the Pentagon's spending bill, but it also has sections in it that restrict the executive branch's ability to transfer detainees, as outlined in Section 1028. So he essentially signed a bill that limits his own authority to carry out a promise he made to the American people. There are also sections 1021 and 1022 from the 2012 version of the bill, which allowed for indefinite detention of prisoners, including those who had not ever been charged. But as far as closing Guantanamo Bay itself, there are some detainees who are believed to be al-Qaeda fighters, about 8% of them. The other 92% are not, and that's according to the U.S. government. 86 of those detainees have been cleared for release, and yet they remain behind bars at Guantanamo Bay. These statistics are part of the reason several hundred people showed up to protest earlier this month on the 11th anniversary of Guantanamo Bay. I was there and I spoke to several people who said this is an issue that affects every single American.
It's international law, it's U.S. law that we don't torture. And it actually, many people have said it makes us less safe. When we mistreat people and torture them, some military people have said this is a great recruiting tool for al-Qaeda. Look what they're doing to our Muslim brothers in Guantanamo. And really, the United States is supposed to be about human rights and justice and freedom, and this is not in line with those values.
So I want to talk about this anniversary, 4 years to the day of a promise made, and so far that's been unfulfilled. Joining me now to discuss is Colonel Morris Davis, currently a professor at the Howard University School of Law, previously chief prosecutor at Guantanamo Bay, and also Neil McCabe, a senior writer with Human Events. Fellas, thanks so much for coming on the show today. And I know that you and I, Colonel Davis, have talked about this quite a few times before, but I think it's really important to get out there. Why, in your opinion, is Guantanamo Bay still open?
It's just been a lack of will, really, on the president's part. I mean, I think he was sincere when he took office and 4 years ago said we're going to close it within 1 year, and we sit here 4 years later and it's still open. It wasn't mentioned yesterday during his inaugural address, but it's just an unfortunate chapter that just keeps going on and on.
And Neil, I want to get your take. I mean, do you think that promise should have even been made in the first place?
I thought it was reckless. I think that he was sort of playing to the crowd. There were people who wanted to believe that it was possible. Gitmo had become sort of a symbol of sort of bad America, and President Obama always wants to be on the side of sort of nice America. But these are irregular combatants who have been taken off the field, and they really should be considered prisoners of war. You don't put prisoners of war on trial. You sort of take them off the battlefield until the war's over.
But, you know, as we said, 86 of them have been cleared for release because not only are they not, have any affiliation with al-Qaeda, they have been, cleared, good to go, and there's just issues putting them back with the, sending them back to the country that they're from. You say it's a symbol of bad America, but that symbol is a recruiting tool.
Well, I think that there was going to be that recruitment anyway. The alternative, really, to Guantanamo Bay is sort of this drone war, because the president doesn't want to put anyone else in Gitmo. Rather than taking you off the battlefield, he'll just attack you with a drone as you're having dinner with your family. So I think if the choice is between drones and Gitmo, maybe Gitmo is preferable.
But Neil said that they were taken to Guantanamo, and they're really essentially prisoners of war, but we took them to Guantanamo to avoid calling them prisoners of war. We picked Guantanamo because it was outside the reach of the law, and we came up with this new classification of unlawful enemy combatant so that the Geneva Conventions wouldn't apply.
Well, Colonel, that is, it's not so much a new distinction, because they are irregulars. They haven't identified themselves as combatants. Their organizations haven't signed any treaties or conventions. So really, these are combatants outside the law, and whatever we give them at Gitmo is basically gratis. It's just out of the kindness of our heart. We owe them nothing.
Neil called Guantanamo Bay a symbol of bad America. It is also a symbol of a place where torture was known to have taken place. Now, when President Bush was in office, quite a bit of information came out about interrogation tactic used called waterboarding. When President Obama came into office, he made it a priority, to outlaw, practices like waterboarding. I want to play something that he said really quick.
Under my administration, the United States does not torture.
So no torture going on. Really, really interesting, and this is timely, and I want to bring it up. Just over the weekend, a 139-page report came out by the United Nations outlining that torture, in fact, does still go on in Afghanistan. This is a country we're trying to leave, at the end of next year. In the report, one disturbing thing I want to point out, it said many of those tortured to extract confessions were children under the age of 18. 76% of those children held, in fact, had reported they had experienced torture or ill treatment. So even though this isn't going to happen, if it's not going to happen at Guantanamo Bay, it's still going on. Talk a little bit about more broadly, Colonel Davis, about torture and how that's perceived. Well,
it's interesting. The theme for the inauguration yesterday was faith in America's future, but you can't have faith in the future when you turn a blind eye to the past, which is what we've done with torture for the last decade. There have been judges, there have been former Bush administration officials, other governments that have acknowledged that we torture. John McCain has said waterboarding is torture. So we acknowledge that we did it, but we totally ignore responsibility for torture. We're a signatory to the Convention Against Torture. We led the effort to pass the convention. We passed the domestic torture statute, and the only person we've ever prosecuted was Chucky Taylor for torture he committed in Liberia, and we've totally ignored our past. So you can't really have a future when you pretend the past doesn't exist.
But are any of these people, first of all, I'm not sure what exactly we're talking about when we talk about torture and ill treatment. My guess is that none of these children were hooked up to like electrodes. There may be loud music. It may be they've been kept awake for a long period of time.
The report outlines specific torture that was done on prisoners in general, including hanging people by their wrists for hours by chains, beating people, things that most people would consider torture. Solitary confinement for ridiculously long amounts of time.
And this report said that U.S. personnel were beating people?
It said that torture is still going on in Afghanistan.
All right, well, I would suggest that maybe U.S. if we're talking about U.S. personnel, I would be shocked if that was going on in Afghanistan right now.
I think a lot of people would be shocked.
And the second point, though, is these combatants, are any of them members of organizations or countries that have signed these anti-torture conventions?
But the obligation is on us, not on them.
Well, if they haven't entered into that contract, anything we do for them is out of the goodness of our heart.
I think Colonel Davis has a good point. The United States every year puts out a human rights report pointing out why other countries are bad in terms of the way they treat people overall. So when the U.S., whether it's here or in other places, is going against
But in U.S. military law, there is a label of irregulars or guerrillas, and this goes back goes back at least 150 years to the Civil War, where people who do not identify themselves as combatants, who do not behave as regular combatants, are not given the same protection as regular soldiers.
But they are given the common Article 3 status. We chose Guantanamo to totally ignore the Geneva Conventions and say they were quaint and they didn't apply. They had no rights other than whatever the president chose to give them out of the goodness of his heart. The Supreme Court stepped in and said, au contraire, the law does apply. And common Article 3 is a baseline for treatment. So,
and Colonel Davis, you were the chief prosecutor at Guantanamo Bay, and you resigned. And the main reason you resigned was because you really disagreed with what you were seeing. Is that right?
Yeah, my policy had been for 2 years we wouldn't use evidence obtained by torture. And then I had some new officials appointed above me that said, hey, President Bush said we don't torture. And if he said we don't, then who are you to say that we do? And to me, that was just a line too far. To go into an American court of justice with evidence obtained by methods that Senator McCain and others say constitutes torture, and to use that to convict someone and sentence them to death was a step too far for me.
What do you think about that, Neil?
I just have first of all, with the waterboarding and things like that, the actual population of people who are physically waterboarded is very small. And the second thing is that what we're calling torture, people in their mind, they're thinking about, you know, bamboo stuck under fingernails and people being electrocuted. I think loud music, people being kept awake. I think the normal sort of what we, I don't want to say enhanced interrogation, but I'll just say enhanced interrogation. There is a war going on, and we're trying to get information from people. I certainly don't support what, like, say, Colonel West did, you know, pretending to shoot someone in the head for information. And in fact, I've interviewed a witness of that, and I think that's sort of obviously, there are things that cross the line, but the fact of the matter is, you know, if you have information in a military operation, you're not going to decide not to use it because you didn't get it from, you know, a clean source. What do you think, Neil, looking ahead? We talked about the past. Looking ahead, I mean, is there any way you think that the U.S. government would be able to eventually shut down Guantanamo Bay? No, I think that You think it should be open forever? I like Guantanamo Bay. I like the idea of Guantanamo Bay, and I certainly prefer it to the drone war, where basically you take a list, you know, the president gets a list of Americans that he basically checks off which ones he's going to attack with a drone missile. I think that a lot of people who are about to get droned in the next two or 3 days would probably prefer to stay at Guantanamo Bay. And what was, you said you've been to Guantanamo Bay. What was your experience there? I was in the U.S. Coast Guard, and that's where Naval and Coast Guard personnel go for training. I've also very good friends with reservists who have been at Guantanamo Bay, actually at the facility. And none of them saw torture, and none of them saw any of the crazy things that people talk about. Well, I'm sure any of those things that go on probably go on in a certain part. I just want to put the last question to you, Colonel Davis. I mean, looking ahead now, I mean, what would it take, and who needs to be involved to sort of change the course here? Well, I think the president was right yesterday in his remarks. He said it's up to him and up to the public on a wide range of issues to, you know, to stand up and do the right thing. You know, he didn't talk about Guantanamo and the national security issues, but I put that in the same category. The people, you know, if you condone it when we do it to others, then we have no right to complain when people do it to us. So we all need to stand up and insist that we live by the rule of law, which he promised yesterday in his speech, that we can have security and still uphold our values and the rule of law. So it's got to be more than rhetoric, it's got to be the reality. We're talking about Al-Qaeda. I mean, these are, I mean, it's not like we're dealing with a real government. I mean, when we're talking about Guantanamo Bay, we're not really talking about Al-Qaeda. Well, these are, we're talking about a small portion. Some of these people are Al-Qaeda. The majority, the great, vast majority are not. Well, for some reason, who were picked up on the battlefield for questioning and were found to be innocent. With all due respect, I think that there are countries who want no interest in these people coming back to them and basically saying, do not send these people to us. That's not always the situation, but we do have to wrap it up. Interesting discussion. I think it is very important to get all of these opinions out here because, frankly, I don't think people are talking about this enough. Retired Colonel Morris Davis, professor currently at Howard University School of Law. Also Neil McCabe, senior writer for Human Events. Thanks, guys. It's not about justice. It's not about agenda. It's not about mobilizing people. It's about dialing for corporate dollars. These two parties have sold the U.S. government and the American people to the highest bidders.